Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we've got another vintage speaker, this time from JBL. This one is the JBL model 4311 and WX-A model. So we're getting in a lot of these vintage speakers right now for some reason. We got a lot of old Pioneer speakers that have just come in that we're going to do, and we already did that HPM 100. We've got a 60 and a 150 model that we're going to follow up on, and this is the first of the JBL series that we've been sent to take a look at these. And this one was about as big a disaster as you could imagine. I just look at some of these old vintage speakers and I just scratch my head and just shake my head and think, wow, this obviously was before they had any modern measuring equipment, and they just threw drivers in a box. And it reminds me of some of the stuff done in car audio way back in the day, where people were just learning what to do and they were just sticking drivers everywhere. And this one pretty much just has drivers haphazardly thrown on a baffle. The alignment and the arrangement of the drivers is a complete mess. The frame that sticks out on these things is another complete mess. There's tons of diffraction off of the frame edges, off of the drivers that are not surface mounted, or they're not flush mounted. So there's a whole lot of diffraction and stuff going on. So it's a lot to have to work with. On a good note, when you slide the grill on, the grill doesn't make it that much worse. So it's not significantly worse when you put the grill on. It's just a disaster coming and going. They just put a single capacitor on the mid to pull the bottom end out of it to keep it from destructing. And they put a very small capacitor on the tweeter just to protect it. Then they put variable resistors down here called presence and let me see what this is again. Presence and brilliance. And so you could turn the levels up or down on these things to make it even more of a disaster. So let's look at some basic measurements and get an idea on what this thing is doing and how messed up it really is. Now, when this thing first arrived, it had a tweeter that was not working. And so we took this measurement of the speaker. This is it with no tweeter. That's right. This is without a tweeter. Notice the mid played all the way up to about 15 kHz. So it's just playing until it rolls off. And then the tweeter was just designed to just top things off a little bit, which when you overlap drivers like that on top of each other, and that's basically what this is. There was no crossover on the woofer. The mid and the tweeter are just on top of each other. And so as you move left or right or up or down in any direction, there is a offset of the drivers that takes place. A time delay is more accurate. One moves further away in time versus the other, and at those higher frequencies where they're on top of each other, what happens is called comb filtering, and that's just a huge cancellation of the response. So just imagine moving in any direction causes huge holes in the response. It's a total and complete disaster. Looking at it with the tweeter, we had to get a new OEM tweeter brought in for it. Notice the measurement didn't change too much. I mean, it just brought it in way up there at the top end, and we had to kind of work with positioning of the microphone and try to find a spot where there's the least amount of cancellation. I think Hobbs settled on somewhere right in the middle here, where you're not too much further away from the other drivers in relation to any of the other two, and worked with the presence knobs, and this is as good as we can make it get. And I know overall, if you look at it, it doesn't look too bad, other than some pretty big peaks up the top end. They're going to be really hot and in your face. But if we look at a spectral decay, let's check this out. There's a lot of ringing going on there. There's a lot of stored energy. And in this first spectral decay we'll look at, it's actually a lot worse than you see here, because that peak way up there at like 7 kHz or so is so tall that it's pushing the rest of everything down. So let's look at it again let's bring it up 5 dB and look at it to get a better idea of just how bad this is. A lot of stored energy in the woofer's range. At the top of the woofer's range, around 1800 and 2500, there's a couple of long peaks there where there's a lot of stored energy. And again, there's no filter on this thing, so it's just playing wide open and getting up into that breakup range. Now, what happens on a woofer when it does this is, imagine the woofer cone flexing, where the woofer itself is moving in and out, but the tips of the woofer are moving at a different frequency than the rest of the woofer. In other words, it's causing a breakup and ringing. Like as the woofer's moving forward, it's resonating or moving independently of the rest of the movement of the woofer. So you get this long trailing ring on top of everything that just it's a distortion, and it's a significant distortion. So there's that going on. Now let's look at the impedance curve while I've got it up here. The impedance was not too bad. It's almost a flat line because there's no crossover function going on. It's just all the drivers playing on top of each other, and it did drop to a 5 ohm impedance load. So now let's look at what happens when we move in any direction. Let's look at that. Let's look at the vertical. Let's look at the vertical off axis going up. That means we're moving up 4 inches per movement. And as you can see, each time we moved, there's a significant change in the response, like big dips and holes. Same thing if we go down. If we get on that reference axis and we start going down, again, huge discrepancies there. Now we're all over the place on the response. Same thing going horizontally. If we look at the horizontal off axis going towards the tweeter, that means we're going this way off axis. Here's the off axis horizontal. Well, notice again the response is all over the place because these drivers are on top of each other and they start comb filtering at certain frequencies. And then here's the horizontal off axis going towards the mid. That's going this way. And in this case, the tweeter's getting further away in time than the mid. Again, huge disaster there. So just a complete mess. So let's look at what I had to work with. This was what really made this one tough. Let's look at the measurement of these drivers with no crossover on them. No filter, nothing in the signal path, just directly the drivers. Looking at the woofer's response curve, you can see those long ridge lines up there in the response. Again, right at 1800 and about 2300 or so. Lots of ringing going on. For this woofer to be usable, we really need to use it below about 800 hertz and cross it off pretty steeply to get it away from all that breakup. Then we're going to have to cross it to the mid. Now let's look at the mid's response. It's all over the place as well. And at the bottom of its curve, it's got what we call a knee or an elbow there, where there's a big peak at the bottom where it rolls off. And if you look at the spectral decay along with it, lots of stored energy there. That thing is just holding stored energy. It's like it doesn't just play and stop. It plays and just keeps on ringing. So the mid can't be used in that range down below that. So we're already at a point where we're going to struggle to make these drivers reach. The woofer can't be used above 800. The mid can't be used below, it can't be used below 1,000 very much. I mean, I'm going to have to reshape this curve just to get anything out of it. I'm going to really have to get aggressive with it and try to knock that bottom end out of it. Now, the tweeter, on the other hand, the tweeter's response is not that bad. I mean, there's a little peak up at the top. Not too concerned about that. It's way up there. That's going to drop off in the off axis a little bit. It's got a little bit of a knee down at the bottom of its range too, but not too bad. It actually covers a pretty wide area. In the spectral decay, we see some stored energy across there that's a slight amount of ringing, but it's not ringing in the drivers as much as what we're seeing here, and because some of those ridge lines, if you look at them, they start to drop off, and then there's a new one that starts out of the blue there. Like there's ridge lines down below that don't really line up with the tweeter output. That's diffraction issues off of this. That's surface reflection off of the woofer, off of the side panel, off of the mid, things like that. It's just diffraction causing some of that ringing. So not much to work with here. This one I thought, oh, this is going to be bad. I don't know if I can make this work. So I spent a full day on this thing jacking with it, trying to keep things within their range. I wound up doing something that what we call a filler driver concept, where the tweeter can actually play down pretty low. This is a cone driver. It's not a little dome with no X-Max. This thing has a surround on it and can move quite a bit. Low FS, it can go low. The woofer, again, limited it to its range there, and I used the mid to just play down low just a little bit and do a filler driver concept to balance it out. I also had to put a notch filter on the tweeter there and knock out some of the peak there and some of the ringing and bring that down to where there wasn't as much ringing in the tweeter's response. So let's take a look at what I was able to do crossover wise with this thing. You can see the filler driver concept and how it worked. You also notice that it's a little bit soft in, I would say, in the range from 2K hertz to 6K hertz. We've got a range there that's down in output about a dB or two on average versus the woofer. So it's definitely a speaker now that I would say get it away from the walls, get it out in the room a little bit. Your room response may be a little more balanced, but this tweeter is playing with no resistors in line with it. This is as loud as it's going to play, and it's just going to be a little softer in that area. And when you've got ringing going on, you see the little peaks. When you see that ringing or the stored energy there, it's usually better to soften it a little bit because it's holding it a little bit longer. So we're kind of counteracting one thing with the other. So not too bad overall. And the mid, which was real problematic, you can see I've got it well down in output. It's almost a two-way, but the drivers won't reach each other, so we're using that mid as a little bit of a filler. And that should give overall the best sound that we can get out of this thing. Notice, let's look at just the on-axis response of it independently. You can see it's still within a pretty good range. There's still that peak at the very top of the tweeter's range. Not too worried about that so much. That's going to drop off in the off-axis. Also, let's look at the effect of putting the grill on it. I did it with the original and with the new crossover. As you can see, it changes it some, but it doesn't change it drastically. Usually when we design a crossover for something, we'll design it with the grill off where we've got a nice smooth rounded edges, and then you put a grill on there that's real thick and it really affects it. In this case, it's affected either way by these edges, so it's not a huge problem with the grill on or off. Also the impedance, because I had to put a pretty aggressive filter on that woofer to try and get that response out of it up top and still try and lift it and not make it just roll off drastically. So it's a bit of an aggressive filter, and that does cause the impedance to drop a little bit. We're at a 3 ohm load on this thing, so keep in mind it's a 4 ohm speaker, and a lot of 4 ohm speakers drop to 3 ohms or so, and this is one of them. And there was just no way of bringing that up and still maintaining a correct response. Without creating a hole in the response, it's going to drop to a little bit lower impedance load. So keep that in mind if you're driving this with something. It needs to be something that's a 4 ohm stable. Also, that 5 ohm load, as you can see, it's up around 500 hertz. So it's not down low where the woofer's demanding a lot of current. It's up higher. So not too bad, but here's where it gets good now. I want to look at the off-axis responses now compared to the off-axis responses before. So we're going to do a little before and after, and you get a little bit better idea of what I was able to accomplish with these things so that it maintains a more even response in all directions. That has to do a lot with the crossover points being much lower, letting this tweeter play a range that it can actually cover. Let's look at, first of all, the vertical off-axis going up. Look at the before and the after. As you can see, now going up, it maintains a lot better response. Also, I'll note, too, that I used the center of the woofer as the new reference axis. So I measured it at that height because the way this thing is designed, the woofer is up at that height. The drivers are down, the mid and tweeter are down lower. So you're going to be more likely to be at this level than you are with it mounted on a huge tall stand to where your ear is at this level. This is more of a reference axis, so I designed it based on this axis. So yeah, going up hardly changed the response compared to what it was before. Let's look at the vertical off-axis going down. Same thing. I'm moving 4 inches per measurement. Let's look at the new vertical off axis compared to the old vertical off axis. As you can see, it's maintaining a much better off axis response. Going down or up hardly even changes the response at all. Now let's look at the horizontal off axis going towards the mid. Let's look at the before and the after. You can tell the before, or the new horizontal off axis, the after the upgrade, much smoother, more balanced. You can go all the way off axis in this direction, and you're not noticing that much of a change in the response, versus before it was going all over the place. Horizontal off axis going towards the tweeter, pretty big difference there as well. The tweeter to the mid starts to drop out at about 12 or 1400 hertz. As you move really far off axis, you get 30 degrees and 40 degrees off axis. The time arrival of these drivers is becoming out of phase, and there's a hole in the response when you get that far off axis. I would say if you're setting this up in your room, set this up so the tweeter's to the outside, so your wall reflection is going to be where that hole is and not more to the middle of the soundstage. That would give you a more even response. So overall, I'm really happy with how it measures off axis now, much smoother. And let's look at the spectral decay. Let's look at the spectral decay now versus what it was before. You notice I got rid of all that ringing, and it's a lot smoother. This, I don't know that you guys realize this, and I don't stress this enough in the videos. The spectral decay is really showing distortion. It's the largest, easiest to hear distortion that you're going to hear in a speaker. It's not whether or not it's at 1% or 2% or what the harmonic distortion is. That's really hard to hear. That's a difference in tonality and stuff. In the spectral decay, what we're seeing is ringing or breakup that where the signal is stopped, but the speaker keeps playing. It keeps holding a tone or a note over a long time. And a lot of times it's significant. We're looking at a measurement here of just 1 watt. So we're not even exciting the speaker very much. When you start putting, 20, 30, 40 watt peaks into this thing, and when you're really driving it hard, if it's got ringing or something going on in there, it can be 10 to 20 milliseconds longer of a decay versus if it doesn't have that ring in it. It becomes very drastic. It's a lot of distortion. So we spend a lot of time looking at spectral decays and trying to make sure that if we design something, we're keeping it in a range where it's really clean. In this case, it turned out great. So we're putting together a little upgrade package. We're going to try to keep it on the budget level as much as possible. We want as many people who have these older models to be able to go in there and put an upgrade together and turn this old vintage speaker that you've been holding on for nostalgic reasons into a speaker you can listen to and enjoy, and kind of bring it up to a modern level. And I want to thank the customer who sent this one in. This one showed up in almost like new condition. Other than the tweeter not working, and we've put a brand new OEM tweeter in, this thing looks brand spanking new. And there's a lot of these out there. People have taken good care of them, and they're in great shape. Why not restore it? Why not upgrade it and turn it into something you can really enjoy listening to, rather than a conversation piece of a speaker that you had when you were a kid in your dorm and whatever, the nostalgia around. And there's a lot of it around these old school speakers. But this one, finally, you can enjoy it. Parts quality, much higher all across the board. Drivers now playing within their range, all new wiring. There's going to be a set of tube connectors that you're going to get that will replace the old spring-loaded push-in connector on the back. Yeah, it was one of those connectors where you pulled the little lever down and you shoved a bare wire in there and let it go on it. It just kind of kinked on it. Oh, that's the worst connection ever. So get that out of the signal path. Tube connector. We're going to throw in some sheets of no-res so you can take care of this cabinet that rings like crazy. That's another form of distortion. You're hitting this thing with a bunch of bass and the cabinet's just ringing and ringing and ringing. Oh my goodness. We've done some sine wave tests where we'll start hitting these with sine waves, and sometimes around 80 hertz to 130 hertz, right in that range. A lot of these big boxes just light up like crazy. They buzz. Oh my goodness, they buzz. It won't hurt for you to go in and add a few little diagonal braces to stiffen the thing up, and then load it with no res to damp out any of those cabinet resonances. Your bass response will be much tighter, much cleaner, lots less noise going on from the cabinet. You'll be surprised how much that can add to the bass output when the box isn't nullifying it by resonating against it out of phase. Or sometimes it's in phase at certain frequencies and it adds a huge woo on top of everything, every bass note. Woo, 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 woo. Oh, can't stand it. So the no-res will take care of a lot of that stuff, damp it all out, get you much cleaner sound across the board. So putting together a complete package for this thing. Look forward on the website. Hopefully we'll have that on there by the time the video is released. I know this was a little bit of a long one. It was kind of technical, and I appreciate you guys sticking with me on this. If you watched it till the end, I hope you got something out of it and learned something. We're going to be applying a lot of these principles to a lot more of these vintage speakers and turning them into something for you guys. So thanks for watching the video, and we'll see you guys in the next one.